Math 3, Unit 5, Section 1. Today we're talking about simplifying radical expressions. Now, more often than not, we take square roots of things, but you'll also find in this unit we're going to take the cubed root of things. Now, anytime that you make a root yourself, it's called the principal root, and the answer can be both the positive and the negative value. Okay? If it's an odd root, though, there is only one root. Now, for instance, and you'll see as we get down here, let's say right here, let's look at this really quick. When you're taking the cubed root of this number, what is negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3? Negative 27. So when you're taking a cubed root, the answer is either going to be negative or positive. But we're not going to be dealing with any imaginary numbers in this unit as well. Okay? So we're only talking about real roots. So we're going to go ahead and start here first. Find the real roots of each number. Okay? So, square root. We need to find the square root of 49. Okay, and the square root of 49 is 7, but it's actually going to be positive and negative 7 because this is really the absolute value of 7. So inside we could have a 7, inside we could have a negative 7, okay? Is 7 squared 49? Yes. Is negative 7 squared 49? Yes. So the idea here is that whenever you make the square root, you can have positive or a negative 7. Okay? B, when you get to decimals, it's easiest to change this to a fraction first and then solve the roots. Do you know how to write 0.16 as a fraction? Okay, good. Someone said it. 16 over 100 is correct. Does anyone know why it's over 100? Good.
That's the last number.
Perfect. Okay, so right here, this goes out to the hundredths place because this is the tenths and then the hundredths. If it went out 3 places, it would be over 1,000. If it went out 1 place, it would just be over 10. Okay? Then we're going to take this square root. And so that really means the square root of 16 over the square root of 100, which is what?
4 over 10.
Very good, 4 over 10. And because this is an even root and I made the root, it's plus or minus. And that would reduce to what?
2 over 5.
Good, plus or minus 2 over 5. Now, because this was originally a decimal, if this was a multiple choice answer, it might have the answer as a decimal. If this was a fill-in, it wouldn't matter if you wrote it as a fraction or a decimal, either would work. Does anybody know how to change a fraction back into a decimal? Very good, you divide. And how that works is you take your denominator, 5, and it divides into your numerator, 2. Now, 5 can't go into 2, correct? And so what do? Add a decimal, bring up the decimal, and add a 0. And 5 goes into 20 how many times? 4 times. And so either of these answers would be correct. So plus or minus 2/5 or plus or minus 0.4. Now on F, it already is a fraction. So we can leave our answer as a fraction, right, Albert and Troy? And so we're taking the square root of this. So we get the square root of 36 over the square root of 121, which is what? 6 over 11, and this is going to be plus or minus because we could have the negative answer and you square it and it becomes a positive, or a positive answer and you square it, it's the positive. Can this one reduce? No. So that's our answer. Any questions so far? Does everybody understand where I'm getting the square roots from? Everybody remembers there's 2 of the same numbers? Yes? Okay. So now we're going to go to cube roots. So with square roots, we need 2 of the same numbers. So with cube roots, we're going to need 3 of the same numbers. So we are taking the cubed root of 64. Now, what will 64 break down to? Very good. 64 is actually 4 times 4 times 4. And because this is a cubed root, we need how many for a group? 3. So I have a group of 4s, and so what will my answer be? It will just be 4. Now, this is not positive or negative, because if I had a negative 4 and I multiplied negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4, that would end up making a negative 64. So when you have odd roots, cube roots, the answer will either be a positive answer or a negative answer. Okay? So the cubed root of negative 27. Good, and this one, you could think about it as breaking down as negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. So we have a group of negative 3's, which ends up making a negative 3. You don't always have to write the negatives like I did here. Just know that when you have odd roots or a cubed root, if you have a negative under the cubed root, the answer is just going to be negative. If you have a positive under the cubed root, the answer is positive. Is that okay? All right, so we have a fraction. We're taking the cubed root of negative 125 over 216. Albert, you getting this? If we go back and look, the cubed root of 64 was 4, and do you see how 125 is larger than 64? So what do we think the cubed root of negative 125 is going to be? Good. So I'm just going to write this out here real quick. Good. So the cubed root of negative 125 is negative 5. 216 is larger than 125.
8.
So 8 would be a good guess, and you could multiply 8 out, and let's see. You get, no, and it's a good guess, it's larger, but 8 times 8 times 8 is 512. So too big.
It was only like 1.
6 times 6 times 6 equals 216.
Hell no.
Okay, so negative 5 over 6 is the correct answer. Okay. So we are going to find each of the principal square roots down here. So our first one, we're taking the cubed root of 8. What does 8 break down to? 2, 2, and 2. And how many do I need for a group here? 3. And so this answer ends up becoming negative 2, because there's a negative outside. Anything that's outside the root just multiplies with it. So this is really a negative 1 times 2, which would make negative 2 for my answer. Okay, the square root of 0.36. What should I do there?
Put it in fraction.
Okay, make it a fraction. So we have the square root of what? 36 over 100. And again, why is it over 100? Very good, it went out to the hundreds place. So now what is the square root of 36? 6, and the square root of 100 is 10. And that would reduce to be what? Very good. And as a decimal, how would I write that? 0.6, yes.
Oh, we have to turn it back into.
Okay, so we're good? Okay. It's not plus or minus.
Why?
Because this root is already here. So basically, whenever you have a root, it's already, we can't have, it's not a negative inside here. Does that make sense?
Neither was B up there at the top.
So we made the square root. So think about how you could have a 0.4 times 0.4, which makes 0.16, or a negative 0.4 and a negative 0.4, which would make a positive 0.16, and all of that would be okay. Here, they've already given you the root, so we know it's not going to be a negative in there that you're getting, you're starting with the root. Okay? So it's just when you're making the root. So 3/5 or 0.6 is the correct answer. And again, if you forget with 3/5, how can I change that to a decimal? What would I do? Good. 5 divides into 3. You add your decimal and a 0. And 5 goes into 36 times, which is how we get 0.6. Okay, what about D? What will this answer be? Good. 9 times 9. So my answer is 9. No, because the square root is already there. Okay. Now, this is where it gets a little bit confusing. But we're going to just do our best. Okay, so when you have roots, so like right here, n, remember that if that is odd, your answer will either be a positive answer or a negative answer. It is what it is. Now, if it's an nth root and it's even, so odd roots would be something like 3 or 5, where even roots are something like 2 and 4. There are times when you have to take the absolute value of your variable to make sure that it is positive. Okay, because under even roots we can't have negative numbers because those would not make real answers. They would make imaginary answers. So we're just going to kind of work through this and we're going to talk about it. Okay, and then come back to this. So 81, this is a square root. There's a chance we might have to use absolute values with our variables. Okay, what does 81 break down to? Okay, 9 times 9. Okay, you need 2 for a group for square roots, so that one's done. Now we're going to go to our x's. I'm going to do this the long way first. So if I have x to the 4th power, I have 4 x's. Does everybody agree? And we need how many for a group? 2. So I have 2 different groups of x's. And then with the y's, there are 2 y's, and so I have 1 group of y's, and there is nothing left over. Is everybody good here so far? Yep. Okay, so when I write this answer, how will I write it?
9x to the second y.
Good. 9x squared y is correct. Now, if x was a negative number and we square it, it would end up making it a positive, right? Because a negative times a negative is a positive. Do we agree? But this y right here, if for some reason it was a negative, it would be negative. And we can't have a negative under our roots. So we have to make this one an absolute value because it needs to be positive in order for it to be a real number. We don't know if it's negative. So because we don't know if it's negative or positive, we have to make sure it's positive by taking the absolute value of it. So that's your answer right there. Now, on your test, there are not going to be any problems where you're going to take the absolute value of it because they're going to tell you in the instructions that they're all real numbers. Here, they didn't tell us that they were all real numbers. On your test, you're not going to have to worry about absolute values. But on the state test, you might see this. And so I just want us to make sure we talk about it today. Okay? If this really, really, really confuses you, don't worry about it. Just know how to get the answer without absolute values. Sound fair? Okay. So this is a cubed root. Anytime I have an odd root, I don't have to worry about absolute values at all. How many do I need for a group here? 3. So the shortcut that I end up liking to use is that I know 3, I need 3 for a group. So a to the 3rd is going to make 1 group, and I just circle it. For b to the 15th, instead of writing out 15 b's, I'm going to count by 3's. So I have b to the 3rd, that's 3. Another b to the 3rd is 6, 9, 12, 15. So if I add all of these up, do you see how there are actually 15 b's?
Yeah.
Okay, So that means, and I'm going to circle these in groups. So instead of writing 3 B's for each group, I'm just writing B to the third for each group. So how will I end up writing this answer?
A, B, 5.
Very good. A, B to the 5th is correct. Questions on B? C. Again, it's a cubed root. What do we know about cubed roots with negatives? Yeah, the answer will just be negative. So we know that our answer is going to be a negative, so I'm just going to write a negative down here. And then I'm not going to worry about the negative for a minute. How many do I need for each group of variables? 3. So for x to the 6th, how am I going to write that? X to the third twice, because 3 plus 3 makes 6. So I have 2 groups of x's. For y to the 18th, how should I write that one out? Y to the third 6 times.
You just divide that by 3 and just not have to write anything else.
So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 groups. If I add all those up, it does add to be 18. So how will I end up writing this final answer?
X squared plus negative x plus y.
Very good. Negative x squared y to the 6th. Is anybody confused by any of that? Because now we're going to end up with leftover numbers inside. Okay, so we're just kind of building on what we've done. So let's go to D.
But we don't have to put absolute value signs because they're leading.
For the test, you don't have to. D, yeah, because these are cubed roots, you don't have to worry about absolute values. It's only even roots that you have to.
Oh, gotcha.
So on D, we might actually have to worry about absolute values.
You don't have to be mean.
Okay, so 72. What does 72 break down to?
You don't have to be mean, Kyle.
What 2 numbers multiply to be 72? Okay, we can go with 8 and 9. And then 8 breaks down to what?
4.
I'm going to say 2, 2, and 2. If you did 4 and 2, and then 4 is 2 and 2, either way. And then 9 is 3 and 3. How many do I need for groups here? 2 of the same thing. So I have a group of 2s, and I have a 2 left over, and I have a group of 3s. Does anybody have questions on this part? Michaela, do you have a question? Ask me. Are you sure? Okay. Now, x to the 5th, how would you end up writing this one out?
10 root 6.
No, let's move to the x's for just a second. How would I, x to the 5th, how do you think I should write that?
Group it in 2.
How many do we need for a group? 2. So I'm going to do x squared, and an x. Does that add to be 5? Because when I don't have a first power, we know this is the 1, correct? So 2 plus 2 plus 1 makes 5. So I have 2 groups, and then I have 1 x left over. That's the x to the 5th. We need 2 for a group, 1 left over. Are we okay? What will I do with the y to the 6th? How many groups? Y squared 3 times, right? Because we need 2 for a group here. And there's no y's left over. That's 2, 2, and 2, which adds to be y to the 6th. Y to the 3rd power, because this is a square root, so I need 2 for a group. If that's fine. You can do that if you want to. Okay, so we're going to bring all of these. Oh, do we have a question? No. Okay. When we bring all of our groups out to the front, notice that there is already a 5 out here. We multiply everything together, including anything that's already out there in front. So 2 times 3 times 5 makes what?
2 times 3 times 5.
So there's already a 5 in front. So we end up with 30. Because each of those groups just become one number, right? So 2 times 3 is 6, times 5 is 30. Are we good? And we can go 5 times 2 is 10, 10 times 3 is 30. We can go 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 5 is 30. We're just multiplying all those numbers together. How many x's? This is going to be 30x to what power? Good. X to the second power, because I have two groups. This is going to stay left over in the root when I finish getting everything in front. How many groups of y's do I have? And so we write that as y to the third. And then we keep our square root, and anything that's boxed stays inside, and you multiply it together. So what's left over inside? 2x. Yes.
Why is it y squared?
How many groups of 2 do I have? No. Group of 2. That's one group. This is 1, 2, 3. So that becomes y to the third. There were 2 groups of x's, so I got x squared. Yes, Bryce? Yes. Okay, for those of you that are paying attention to the absolute value thing, because this is an even root. Actually, not the x, it'd be the y. Sorry. So an even power, if this was a negative and you squared it, it would become a positive. So that's great. But if for some reason the y was negative, it wouldn't work out right. And so you would need an absolute value around the y to the third. If that confuses you, don't worry about it. Just leave your answer without the absolute values.
Oh, so you don't care?
It's said on your test, it says all real solutions, and so it's only dealing with real values, so we don't have to worry about it. Okay. Any other questions right now on D? Okay, E. Since it's a cubed root, we won't have to worry about absolute values no matter what. What does 56 break down to? Okay, 8 and 7. And then 8 breaks down to be 2 times 2 times 2. How many do you need for a group? 3. So I have 3 2's, and I have a 7 left over that I'm boxing. So far, so good? Okay, now with the a to the 9th, how will I break the a's up? In 3's. Okay, and so we'd have 3, 6, 9. So I have 3 groups of a to the third, and there's no a's left over. How will I write out b to the 5th?
B to the third.
We need how many for a group? 3. So it'll be b to the third and b squared. So I have one group of 3, but this b squared, that one we're boxing because it's going to be left over and go in that square root box. Okay, how will I write out c to the 8th? How many do I need for groups? 3. So we're going to write that as c to the third, c to the third, and then c squared. So I have 2 groups, and then I have a c squared left over. Is anybody confused by that? Do we want to ask questions? We're good? Michaela, you're good? Okay, so let's look at the numbers. Do you guys see how we have a 3 here?
Yeah.
And then this group of 2's, we multiply that together, and what does it become? 6 is correct, because each group just becomes a single 2 when you bring it out. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so then let's go to the a's. Well, there's already a squared outside, and then how many more a's am I adding to that? 3. So that's going to make a to the third, and then we already have a squared out here, so it's going to make a to the 5th. Are we okay with that?
Yeah.
And then how many b's? How will I write the b's? Just b to the first, right? Or b. And then the c's, I'll write that as what? C squared. Good. When you are writing this, make sure that you keep it as a cubed root when you're writing your answer. And then you need to look for everything that's boxed. So if I go through here, I have a 7, I have a b squared, and a c squared. So that's all that I write here in the box. 7b squared c squared. Do we have questions? Anything we want to go back that doesn't quite make sense? Okay, F. 72. What does 72 break down to? Okay. 8 and 9. And then we know that 8 breaks down to be 2, 2, and 2. And 9 is 3 and 3. And so this is square root. So how many do we need for a group? 2. So I have one group of 2s and a 2 left over that I box. So I remember to keep it in my root box at the end. And then we have a group of 3s. How will I write out the x's? X squared and x. Good. So we have one group, one left over. What do I do with the y's?
Y squared, y squared, y squared.
Good. 3y squared, because that's 2, 4, 6, and then 1 left over for the 7th. So we have how many groups? 3 with 1 left over. And then z to the 8th?
C squared.
Good. So I'm going to write this as z squared 4 times. So it's 2, 4, 6, 8. So 4 groups, nothing left over. Okay, so we're going to write our answer now. What will it be?
6,
Good. So we have 2 times 3, which makes 6. And then how many x's? How do I write the x's? Just x. Good. And then what will I write for the y's? Y to the 4th. Why 4? Good. You had 3 groups and 1 already out there, so that makes 4. And then I'll write z to the 4th. And then inside my square root, and I don't have to write a number when it's square root, only if it's something different than a square root. And inside, what do we have left? This is where you have to be careful. This is why I always box it and go look through. 2xy. Okay. Now, for those of you that are paying attention to absolute values, where would an absolute value be on this one? Just around the x. Very good. If you don't know, it's okay. Do we have any questions? Okay. Last 3 examples. It says find all real solutions to each equation. If we are solving for x, what would I do here? How could I get x by itself? Very good. Now, whenever you make a square root, that should remind you that it's going to be positive and negative. This is how we learned it at the beginning of the year, though, because the square root of x squared is the absolute value of x. The square root of 121 is what? 11. And because it's the absolute value, we know that x will end up equaling positive negative 11. Because inside could be positive and it comes out as 11, or inside it could be negative and it come out as 11. And notice here, I made the roots. When you're making the roots, it's going to end up being positive and negative. Now, cubed root is different, correct?
It's an absolute value. How can it be positive or negative?
Inside here, you could have a positive 11 and it comes out as positive 11. Or inside here, you could have a negative 11. And the absolute value of negative 11 also is positive 11. So x could equal positive or negative. Cubed root, what do I do? Oh, I just said it. We're going to take the cubed root. Okay, and so what will x equal here? Negative 5, and only negative 5, correct? Because if you had a positive 5, could you multiply positive 5 and end up getting a negative 125? No. Okay, good. All right, what am I going to do on the last one? Very good. We're going to take the square root. We're going to change this decimal into a fraction. So we end up getting the absolute value of x equals, and how would I write that as a fraction? 1 over 100. Because the number is 1 and it goes out to the hundredths place. What's the square root of 1? 1. What's the square root of 100? 10. And so the answer is actually going to end up being what? X equals plus or minus 1/10 or 0.1. And again, if you forget how did I get to that decimal, we're dividing 10 goes into 1, you add a decimal and a 0, and it goes in exactly 0.1 times.
Oh. I'm done with that.
Any questions?